Ja, den här, just det här. Jag kommer aldrig ihåg vad det här är.
Det kommer det ringa dig.
Ja, men precis.
Right. Time is up. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and that you had some time to answer emails and so on. We are going to go on with this afternoon. Like we said, we will put OSD in context. Why are we doing this? What can it be used for? But initially, we will have Mats present his experience in working in the tool. What have their challenges been? What have been the benefits? How have they tackled them? So please make sure that you ask him questions. And for the CIS personnel, obviously you can catch him and Kristin afterwards as well. We will have a short break also in the afternoon where you can stretch your legs, get a coffee and some fika. And then we will continue and approximately 4:30.
Okay, thank you. Testimony, something it said in the agenda, so it feels like I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or something like that. Influenced by TV, of course. But how do you summarize OSD, and how do you summarize the experience of OSD? Of course, it's very individual. There is a lot of people. From my perspective, I'm working with OSD, or have been working with OSD for almost 4 years. I put 3 years because that's where I can prove in the email inbox and stuff like that. But even closer. Oh my God. My journey with OSD then started almost 4 years ago, because it was a good time of lobbying to convince that gentleman that we actually wanted to be part of the pilot and be part of the training and stuff like that before we were actually granted to be in the actual OSD production environment. But I'm not alone. Christine as well in this room here is helping me with ISO TC211, where we are doing this work. And what have we done then? Well, we were among the first projects to come to that CD consultation, which was a very big step in the OSD, because there where we actually saw this is going to be a great tool. But we were also the very first project that went through the DIS stage. So that was a checkbox. But then, of course, as you see, it's much faster developing standards than developing OSD. So we had to pull our 19103 out of OSD to do the FDIS in the normal Word way.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello, hello?
There's nobody hearing us.
We can hear you, but
No,
we hear
we hear
more. We hear another conversation as well. So please, somebody could mute.
We are trying to verify that. Again, we had to pull it out of the OSD just at the final stage. And happily, I can tell you that it was published Friday last week. So we were very happy to have that among the first OSD standards actually now being a real standards out there. This is a good example to be able to find a project leader that it's not that is willing to try out the new tool. And We find a project leader in Denmark called Heidi Van Paris, which has been a champion, I must say, within using OSD. She has been even in more contact with Patrice than I have, and sent regular weekly update with what's working, what's not working, what needs to be changed. But for some reason, they change things and make it better, and it starts to work when we send in this feedback. So it's been quite a nice journey to be part of that development, to see that actually hands-on adaptation of the tool gives effect when we report it back. So I would just thank you for the journey we've been on for that long, and listening to us as maybe headstrong sometimes, coming with feedback on things that we wish to have been working differently. So OSD on international level, OSD on SEN level, we have it there as well. So of course we have tried that as well, but there is also a SEN SMART project going on, and we see that there's a competitioning tool, but it's also font to XML in there, and we in Sweden have started to use this authoring tool for our standards in Sweden, and with that we have, of course, gotten that head start to actually write in XML. So we are very now geared up to hear about Patrice talking about that national OSD, which we have been waiting for such a long time. So that is what I'm looking forward to Christmas. Just glancing at Patrice here. But then again, how do you get from one courageous project leader doing one project in OSD, because you can always find one person? Well, you have to start talking to your committee. I then am the committee manager, so I usually say my work is to talk, and Christine's work is to work. So we divide it up in that sense. But then we have these plenary meeting twice a year, and I've always talked about OSD on all of these plenary meetings, but because we have that secretary report item on the agenda. So we started to talk, and of course you then maybe have a bigger committee or smaller committee, and you can have a lot of groups. Then of course, in my case, in TC211, we have a lot of advisory groups. They don't write standards, so they are disqualified in that sense. But we have a lot of working groups as well. And then you have to start to find that courageous project leader in each working group. And if you are, like me, quite stubborn, you talk to everybody who starts a project. Shouldn't you use OSD? And they often say no, but some say yes. And in the end, we end up with, well, we have OSD in several of our working groups, almost of all our working groups. Well, there's one we don't administrate. So of course, I can't work with project leaders in that one. And there's one working group where we only do, or not only, mostly do adoptions of works from another standardization organization. So those are fast-tracked, going directly to the DIS. So of course, they are not the prime candidates to be pilots in an OSD. But we're talking about those as well, because that's a specific case where we coming from an XML source wanting to import into an XML tool. So that could be a fun exercise in the future. But once you have gotten that one project leader in each working group trying out the tool, we start to get the ball rolling in that sense that they talk to each other and they compare. Well, what are you doing in Word? What are you doing in OSD? How easy is this to handle? what challenges there are and stuff like that. And you then end up with a working group. This is my working group 6 around imagery. And of course, most of them are now in OSD because it's easier. Once you have gotten over that threshold that it's okay, it's a little bit scary, it's new, we have to learn new things, we have to adopt to new situations. But once you have taken that first little step, you see, well, it's easier. It becomes more easier for the convener to know what is the latest version of each of the projects in there. It's more easier for the project team members, because in a working group, or in our working groups, we have divided into 2 project teams. Where do I find that latest version of my project? Or I want to compare my project with their project. How can I do that in a fast and simple way? When if everything is online, if there only one single truth of each document, it's a lot more simple. And I'm so happy I don't have to do word compare anymore. It's so boring to have those 5 different Word versions, and we are going through submission and trying to find out, okay, what have they done? And you have to spend better part of a week trying to sort that out. So nothing more of that now. And more things that are time saving. In the end, just not just knowing which is the true source that we are going to submit, but also knowing that everybody has been involved. You can go back and you can see how the document has evolved. Of course, we haven't done so much versions, so we have a huge amount of track changes that you can go back and see every little changes in the entire document and stuff like that. It becomes very useful when there is a discussion. Now again, all my experts are very nice to each other. They almost agree on everything. So there's no hard discussion. So it has been a rather smooth way of introducing this tool, which is perfect for them to do the collaboration. Is everybody on board? No. There are especially 2 older gray-haired gentlemen who says, well, I've been writing in Word for the last 40 years. Why should I stop now? Why should I use this tool? So I was almost falling off my chair last week when I got the request from one of these elder gentlemen. Well, everybody else using it. Why shouldn't I? So now he's also in. I've got one still then who says, I will never use the tool. But if I can get 90%, it's good for me. And I haven't heard Patrice mention this, but maybe it will come up. We talk about 5% of ongoing projects being OSD projects. I'm proud to say that 5% of the OSD projects are ISO TC211 projects. So even if that's only a small piece of the cake, it's still a huge thing for us. So right now we have 14 ongoing projects. And of course, then we have a couple of ones who have tired and left, and we have one that has been published. So I think we are up to 20 projects that we have run in OSD. And I often get the question of, okay, but what do the project leaders say? Do you have a good quotation to give to people who's going to start using them? And going back to that 19103, I started with the standard that just was published Friday. Heidi told me OSD discussions in the plenary sessions. She raised her hand and said, well, if I don't have to go back to Word ever, I would be happy. So I think that was a big thing that got at least not everybody on board, but at least they opened up the door for the possibility of doing this. But of course, it's hard to be the first one, and it's hard to pinpoint that first project that will be the key to the success within a committee. So you have to be a little bit stubborn. You have to talk to many people. You have to convince them to be there for them, to help them, to support. Training is very good. The training is mostly opening the idea of using the tool. Then when you come down to the practicality of actually writing in the tool, I've found that mentoring works a lot better. So I've spent hours and hours with my editors, trying to help them find their way in the tool and start writing. But I've also seen that curve becoming less and less and less, because now, and this is also actually last Friday, the colleague of Heidi in the office in Denmark is now starting up a revision of ISO 19111, which you don't know. It's land masses that are moving and stuff like that, reference systems to them. Not important for this discussion, but it was fun to see that, of course, now he has a source in his own office. He can go talk OSD with. So just being brave enough to have those first pioneers in there has given us a very good place to now everybody. It's more common for us to use OSD than not. And actually, I had that suggestion to take such a resolution in our last plenary. And then TMB came with their resolution saying it's going to be default anyhow. So then my resolution for we should do everything in OSD didn't really catch on, since it was more or less mandatory for TMB. But with that, I would say I've been invested in this for the major part of the last 4 years, and I don't think it will stop anywhere soon. So I think that's my whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mats. Just a comment before I release questions. So in the case of mentoring for both the external and internal people, we will have to start with at least 4 OSD champions, is what we call them. Why don't you stand up, Katarina, Theo and Mats, who will be supporting the colleagues in their sort of mentoring, setting up the work and so on. We do have a lot of people also at SIS who have been involved in the piloting, and so we have even more people who have actually been working in the tool who will also be helping their colleagues and in the sort of an extension, the experts and so on. So, and if we come to a case where we see, okay, we need more champions because the pressure is so hard, then we will get more champions, so let's say. So just to let you know that you are in good hands.
And I would say using the authoring tool that we do on national level now, I mean, you get 95% of the user experience of writing in OSD with that authoring tool. So it's a very good investment of time to have a look at the authoring tool and see what that can give. So I would like to just say that I think that was one of the most clever decisions we did with this standardization in Sweden, to actually be very early adopters of both piloting this and then going for this year, that it was a mandatory thing for us on a national level. Then the TMB communique was not that so frightening to read. So that was me. Any questions?
That was great.
Actually, like I would like to say, he hasn't got a single euro, you know, just a bit of chocolate. But thank you very much. Thanks. we needed you, you know, we were really looking forward to having early adopters, but you were more than just an early adopter. And your committee have shaped, you know, a lot of what the tool is today. So thank you. We just got a question during the break, more like an actual demonstration of what accessibility could mean. And I'd just like to address it with all of you, because while we said that the SEN has put up a task force to look into what we could be doing, you know, from a product perspective to improve the OSD editor, I want to give you a few tips today to optimize, let's say, what you can do to have a good use of the platform. So
We're just going to check the sound again.
Oh.
Online or.
no worries. Just a minute.
We love hybrid meetings.
Maybe to Zoom it.
Ett, två.
We're good. Can you hear us online? Can I get somebody
Yes,
to?
yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So we have quite some time this afternoon. We are going to go into very nice discussions very soon about, you know, the future of standardization, but very concrete things. So the OSD is an online tool. It's an online platform. It's an online web browser-based tool. So the same principles that apply, you know, the common sense to have a good experience still apply here. And somebody has told me, we can see your mouse, you know, and that's a very basic thing. So now it's huge, obviously. But the same principles, you know, of common sense still apply when you share your screen and you have a meeting online. So there's some things that the tool can improve, but also you can have, you know, sometimes just think about something like this is very helpful. Then I'm working on a very small laptop, so that's, I think, less than a 13-inch, but the tool works on this. Obviously, it's better when you want to review a document or you have a lot of work to do if you have a shared screen or you have a second screen with a bigger resolution. Definitely, the tool is just, you know, there's more space on your screen. It feels better. But if you are working like me on a small laptop, so the first thing you need to look into is the basic zoom setting.
So here is something I'm a bit struggling with because I know that Windows recommends 150%, but honestly, I don't know if you have that setting set up on your laptop. That will just break the tool down. And honestly, I can't work with 150%. So usually we recommend to set the zoom at 125%. Again, maybe not ideal, but I'm trying to give you tips to optimize how the tool works today. If after that it's still not user-friendly enough, you can also share that feedback with us, and then we'll share it with the task force, which is working on improving the tool. Resolution. So basically right now I'm in 1920 by 1200, but the tool can support lower resolutions. So not really so impacting, because as soon as you go into the editor, what matters the most here is that there is a zoom option which is available here. So you don't want to act too much on the resolution and on the zoom of the browser. So basically the zoom of the browser, you keep to 90 or 100%. You don't touch this one too much. But then if you want to make the screen more visible, I need to refresh my screen, by the way. So what can you do to make the experience better? The first thing, you realize that the project is always embedded in ISO projects. So you want to click on full screen because you want to minimize the amount of space that's taken on the left and taken on the top. And we are going to probably also remove this in the near future to give you even more space. If you focus on the main contents, you can hide the outline and you can start zooming in. And that's basically going to give more space on the screen for reading the contents of our basic commenting. So we are going to write a knowledge-based article about this because, you probably couldn't know that was the step to have more contents visible on the page. And if you have any more feedback, we'll be happy to listen to it. All right. Okay, so.
So I think I was the one asking about this, and I'm also wondering if there are some default settings for the best option, for example, when you're reviewing the comments. Now you showed us for when working with the main text, but perhaps there is a optimized settings for working with the comments, for example.
So not yet. We have showed you the tips to optimize the readability in the main screen, but that will not really have an impact on the visibility of the comments. So we know Fonto is working with the SEND task force to improve this specific bit, because especially if you have lots of comments in those bubbles, they're very difficult to work on. So I know they are designing a new commenting sheet that would be, taking more space on the document. Or they're also looking into merging that bubble visualization with the text. So when we have updates, we will let you know. If any of you are especially interested in this, or if you're directly touched by these features, we'll give you our contacts and we'll be in close touch.
Thank you.
I'm sharing my screen. How do I shift? Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so now we are going to cover, I'm basically doing a very long introduction for Shell to basically tell us all the good work CIS is looking forward to doing. And one thing, a message we are starting to bring, is there's a huge need for better coordination. And we see OSD as an opportunity. It's an entry door for us to create more digital value for the future. And not all of this is like, in a very long distant future. There's lots of things we could do very soon. And we also want to share that with you to keep you excited. Another promise that TMB, another, how can I say that, constraint that TMB put on us when we started the program was you need to model and digitize standardization as it exists today. So do not change the processes, do not change the deliverables. So for you, project leaders and conveners, committee managers, what's the incentive? And I'm asking a rhetorical question, like, why would you change your processes, which are well established, if we are not creating any added value? It's very strange, actually, to not look at what technology could leverage, but just map an existing process. Obviously, we know changing standardization is tough. So that's why we go with this approach of not changing too much things. But now that we have done this first step, which was quite difficult, we can have a lot of fun and we can actually start looking at leveraging value. So what could OSD do to actually facilitate, the participation and the work at the technical level? Here, we want to look at a few incentives, bells and whistles we will implement in the OSD very soon to get you attracted to it. And that's another, plus you can give mats to your network of experts in the future. We today have two basically production chains. We have two standardization chains. We have the OSD one and the traditional one. Certain things will be done only in the OSD one. So there's lots of added value that's going to come in the OSD production chain, and we will voluntarily not do it in the old production chains. And I'll explain to you why. So that's an additional incentive for your committees to adopt the tool because they may are interested in these features. Obviously, we are looking at this from the perspective of ISO and IEC, and we have a very close coordination with the SEN and SENELEC. And among our priorities, the first thing we want to do, we have an online browser for you that's open on our entire catalog potentially. We want to leverage that. So what we are looking at here is to basically make the entire catalog of standards accessible in the OSD so that when you draft a standard, you could browse, access clauses of other standards, something that's difficult for you to do today. You can request access to certain standards in the OBP, but it's a different system. And here we would basically, empower you to access all the existing information. The other thing we'll be looking at here is to allow you to create cross-references between different standards. And we will analyze to what level we want, what granularity we want. That's something ISO and IEC will work on next year to see if we make cross-references at clauses or at element level, most probably at element level. And there'll be a mechanic implemented in the tool for you to open a standard, browse a clause, access an element, and create a cross-references to it. And when we look into this feature, it's a lot has also to do with the reuse of contents. We want to help you rationalize how the contents are created into your deliverables. So we are also exploring, having an integrated way to manage graphical symbols. So opening the database of graphical symbols for you to be able, to directly reference it. And we are going to engage with the committees who are really managing the graphical symbols to see how we integrate these features. We are looking into centralized terminology. So here it's funny because IEC has a kind of edge on us. IEC has an Electropedia, the IEV terminological database. It's a bit simpler for them because I would say that their functional domain is a bit more constrained than ours, but it doesn't mean we can't do this. And what we are trying to explore, so in the first iteration, we are going to display the production terms that are already existing in your respective standards. And when you create a term, so you're in a document, you're creating the term Toto, Fonto, the OSD editor, will be able to tell you that term already exists in 6 standards. These are the terms we find, these are the definitions we find, and you'll have an opportunity to reuse or import that content into your standard. So that ensures, that there's consistency across the catalog, and that's something we sorely need to be able to build more digital contents. If you want to derive the term, you can. We don't have a clear scope yet. When we have it, we will share, of course, with our external community, but you'll be able to add a note 2 and 3, and we are going to explore, how we manage this moving forward. But the intent is really for us to clean our terminology and to be able to offer you and to offer our external also a community of users a clean terminological database. That would be quite wonderful. So obviously you're starting to see that those can have political impacts because sometimes different committees have the same term and they manage the term separately. So that could lead to very funny discussions, and new governance topics. So we're not going to tackle these. We just want to raise these questions to the governance, and we might set up new ways of working moving forward. It's also up to you to tell us, where we need to put the priorities. So after each slide, I'll be quite interested to get your feedback about what you think is interesting, what is less interesting, what could be a priority for us. The templating and management of series. So today we don't have any proper management of series. We actually don't identify them properly, but we want to explore these concepts because, for instance, you're creating a standard. You want to use that standard as a baseline for a new standard. You've created all your chapters, all your clauses, and your standards are very similar. We could have a feature in the OSD, you click on a button and you use as a base. And then you get going and you don't have to redraft everything. Or you could extract the outline of an existing document to start from there. We purge the contents and you have the outline ready for your new standard. And there's so many things we can do. We need your ideas as well. What could be helpful? What do you do today? Facilitating also the management of series. So having a way for you to identify documents which are part of series, how they are referenced to each other, and what does that mean for the consumers? Because today we don't have that proper management, so we basically use the normative references section to know which documents have to be used together from a normative perspective. But this also opens new opportunities for us as we link the contents together. The MSS is a specific use case. Any of you involved in MSS work today? As any role, author, experts? 9001, 56001, 14,001. Shell? Huh? Yeah, so that's, this year people have come to us and said OSD need to solve the problem of MSS. So we look at what happens with MSS. So directives state that an XSL is there and that the committees have to follow the text of the NXSL, but they can make derivations. And there's no rule as to what these derivations can be today. So of course, when there's a change to the base NXSL, the editors are going to shout a bit and challenge the committee. But if the committee insists, the derivations comes forth. So the first thing we are going to look into is to understand what are the differences. We are going to try to understand and document what the differences are, why the committee requested them. We are going to also analyze from a consumer perspective, how these MSSs are used today, so that we can come to a mechanism where we can be more prescriptive. And I think that word prescriptive is very important towards everything we are doing. We need to become more prescriptive about how things are created in our system. if a derivation is possible, it has to be consistently done the same way all across the catalog so that we can then have SIS build factories and tools to process these derivations, because it will always be codified the same way. So those are very ambitious projects that could leverage a lot of value. But to be able to do this, we have to have a common door and a common set of rules and codification, which is the OSD. In a word-based process, it's impossible because you'll keep having exceptions all over the place. There's no control on the quality of the contents, at a codification level. So also for your committees, these projects, it's like a wake-up call. Okay, we are going into the digital age of standardization, and what is important for us as a committee? What do we want to provide the consumers? A very important point for us is the facilitation of national adoptions. So Mats has talked about the national OSD. The national OSD is coming. So what do we mean by national OSD? Since a few years, we have members coming to us and saying, could we reuse what you've done? Could we use the international OSD tool to do national standards? And ISO is, you own us in a way. Whatever we do belongs to our members. So at the moment, we have a partnership with members to exchange knowledge and to exchange solutions. But what we've realized is that when we move towards XML, and I'm going to have to talk about XML because XML is kind of the language we chose to adopt when we move towards digital standardization, we didn't go all the way with that approach. And in a way, ISO did its own implementation, IC did its own implementation, members had to do their own implementation, and there were lots of gaps and disconnects. So it's not only about having a national layer, it's about understanding what a national adoption is. So over the month of July, we've done great workshops. Mats was there, he's always there. And it's good. And we've looked into what a national adoption is. We asked BSI, SIS, Peru, Australia. It was very fun because today members have very different ways to do the same thing. Standardization, right? Everybody does things differently. So basically we took all this and we are trying to propose a vision where adopting the international contents would be done in a consistent way. And not only for SIS, but potentially for all the members. So we are documenting this and we are creating a functional specification that is actually ready since last week. That will be a base for development of a first solution that we would be providing SIS, but other members to create national standards and national adoptions. That means two things. For your national experts creating national standards, same tool, same look and feel, same features. So that's obviously a great benefit. Secondly, a consistent way for you to create your national adoptions. And when you look at the ISO system, a consistent way to do this for all our members. If a member wants to go their own separate ways and codify something completely differently, we are not going to stop them. We can't stop them, but we hope that that vision of a shared system leverages so much value downstream that it will create, a good collaboration. And it's not about the tooling again. So you see the OSD today. There could be other tools creating standards, but what's important is how we basically codify our knowledge, how we define our knowledge. And I'm going to get back to that in the next slide. Another thing that OSD potentially leverages, and that's an important message for you, we have quite a lot of committee managers and project leaders saying the OSD is not fit for purpose because it cannot handle my tables. And I didn't come with examples of tables. I should have probably. I'll try to find them a bit later. When you look at these tables, we discussed a bit before, they are made to be read. They are clearly designed, from the perspective of somebody who's going to print a page in landscape and read the table. So we're trying to tell these committee managers and project leaders, you could use Excel files. They will contain the same data, or we could look into new software supplements or electronic inserts that you could refer to in your standard. You could even display them. You know, we can create hyperlinks. We can be very innovative. So we need you here to tell us, you know, what could be done, what would have more value for your consumers when you lead these great projects. If you have data which is embedded into, you know, complicated tables, if you don't tell your authors, you know, we need to move towards something more than just formats for the consumers of standards as well, your experts will not go towards that direction because they don't have, you know, leadership and guidance on this. So here, OSD opens a lot of possibilities, but we will need mostly your push, you know, because we don't want to become prescriptive on this and make the committees unhappy. So I'm going to take a break after this slide, which is not the easiest one, but I'd like to get your feedback on these different possibilities.
Okay, I'm especially interested in the terminology functions here, and there are a lot of questions actually for it, but some of them are, how will the search function work? Because there will be, for example, if you have a term like quality, you would have 500 term entries you would probably be able to pick up. So is there a sorted by ICS code or by TC or whatever, or and is it also a search that is exact, or is it a fuzzy search and so on? Because it's, I think, in order to be useful, it has to be you need to find the thing, terms that you're searching for.
So what we're going to do for terminology, we are actually going to create a database. So we are not going to just expose the terms which exist today in production. We are going to create what we call a staging database. And that staging database will contain a lot of information. TC, SC, ICS, etc. You'll be able to search and refine for all these criteria, and there'll be a fuzzy search. So if you type the term A with definition and the term B with the same definition, the tool will be intelligent enough to see that the same definition is used for two different terms. And the possibilities are endless. So here, of course, we will consult with our stakeholders for the first iterations. But then when you use the tool, you can tell us, this is, you know, there's too many occurrences, I'm missing this filter. But yeah, this is the way we are going. So there'll be extensive searching, fuzzy searching, and refinery. And there'll be nothing mandatory. Like you want to create your own term, you can, it's still like the FCQ you've seen today in Fonto, in OSD. There's nothing making it mandatory for you to apply a change or to do the spell check. You can ignore it. So here we are just trying to bring those features alive in the solution, and hopefully you'll see the benefit and use them.
Since this is just the beginning, huge for terminology, and in order to get the search results, you need to fill in a lot of standards, I guess. So would that be prioritized to import terminology into the tool?
So that has actually been done already by the SMART stream. So the SMART stream at ISO has analyzed the back catalog of terms and has created a few recommendations we could share with you on how to, you know, also simplify the terminology. So that database already exists somewhat. We are just going to basically improve it. So this is coming before June 2025 in production.
We will continue with the question of terminology. when you say the terms are implemented, does this also include terms that may be occurring in common dictionaries, things like that? Because there is quite often there is a term that comes up, you can find it in a dictionary or an encyclopedia somewhere, and sometimes they are generic enough to be used, or something then you probably should not be used at all, or sometimes you need to make some little modification, but it's good to be able to check this when you work on it. Moreover, I'm the guy who's working with terminology in ISO TC261, which is the committee that's working, have a parallel or joint development with ASTM and parallel ballots. So I have to also look into the ASTM terminology dictionary and work that in parallel. So I understand you cannot put that in, but it's put in a new level of
We can.
complication.
So the way we're designing the terminology feature is that we are not just going to make it pluggable to a single repository. We are going to create a system where we could feed terms coming from any source, and we are going to identify that source. So for instance, we are going to expose as a source the ISO standards, but IEC will expose their IEC IEV database. And potentially you could use a term that exists in the IEV that could be sourced as a term coming from the IEV and derive it with a note to entry, an example, or something which is different. Or you could just, completely change it, but you could just use it. If ASTM can deliver, a terminology with the format we will be expecting, we'll be providing basically, an entry format. We could plug to any terminological database that exists in the world, so that basically you could have access also to these dictionaries. The main question is more about how we adopt those contents into our standards. I'm not sure we can source IEC terms in ISO documents. That I'm not sure. If anybody knows here, I'm happy to hear. But we'll be looking into this, obviously. We don't want to breach directives part 2 for sure, but we want to avoid the creation of duplicates all the time.
I'm not sure my question fits in this the context, but it's about the future coming quite fast regarding AI. We've been starting seeing AI tools used within standardization, for example, at meetings, bots log in and record and note and summarize the meetings. How do we make sure that there's an actual person behind an OSD contributor or author or such?
So that's a great question. I'm not the right person to answer it, though. I know we have people at ISOCS who are, responsible of guidelines on AI, and we can probably refer your question to them. I will show you a bit later what we think AI could do for you, but not from an impersonation perspective, but more like, tools and features that we will develop. But your question is great. And actually, I don't have an answer for it yet. But there's also now AI bots coming to meetings, apparently. And it's crazy, huh? And there's not much different using the OSD or any regular solution. Like, that's a wider question, how do we make sure the digital person in front of us is a real person?
So, sorry, I have a question about extended content in the standard, like in how it's handled in OSD and how it's thought to be extended deliverables. Is there like limitations, or can you describe the thought of how this content that is not traditional text, tables, figures is supposed to be handled in the flow?
So today what we have at our disposal is the maintenance portal. So the maintenance portal is a very basic repository where you can drop digital assets which are beyond just text. So images usually are going into the standard, but Excel files, code files, software executables can be stored in the maintenance portal. And then you're going to create a cross-reference, an hyperlink between the standard and that element in the reference portal. And when we package the publication, we deliver the PDF and those software supplements as well in the zip. So that's quite limited. But let's say you want to manage code. I don't know if any of you do code in their standards. We could provide code repositories. Those code repositories could be somewhat linked to the OSD because your code also has versions, right? There's a lot of versioning in code. You don't want to keep pushing a new version of the code file in the maintenance portal every day. So if you have this requirement to handle something which is beyond text, get in touch with us and we will design the best possible way to provide, I don't know, a GitLab or something, you know, that would let you drive that code versioning, and then there will be a link between the final code and the OSD. So here it's a lot of work to be done, but we need you to understand what needs to be done. Everybody still with us? Interested? Yeah, we are going to go deeper now with something which is, I think, very, very important. So the OSD creates opportunities to create more digital value. I'm going to give you two examples of two different perspectives. And I hope you'll find them compelling. People have asked us to create non-breaking spaces in the OSD. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation. I'm going to go in the OSD now so that everybody understands what we're talking about. There we are. So where is my OSD editor? It's here. So a non-breaking space is, you know, like in Word, a non-breaking space because you want the two words to figure together next to each other, or because you want to avoid a page break in a document. Oops, sorry. Sharing my screen. Okay. So for instance, if I type 9mm here, and if I say length is 9mm, today I told you Fonto OSD, the editor, is not what you see is what you get. So here you see that these two things are together on the page, right? They look like it's fine. It's not shocking me. When we make a PDF export out of this, it's possible. The 9 is here and the millimeter is here, which is a problem, right? It looks very bad on a PDF when you print it out. So what do? We can create a non-breaking space, right? And have a way to introduce here a non-breaking space character with insert between the 9 and the millimeters, so that our production chain knows to keep those two things together when we print a PDF. What else could we do? Anybody has an idea? I'm going to give you a clue. 9.875 and 2, 3, 4, 5 with a space like this. So now the length is not in millimeters, but in meters. So it's 2,369.876 meters. Anybody seeing where I'm going with this? Digital marker, digital decimal marker, 1,000 separators. You know how much these guys there struggle to publish standards? Because today, what we do, we commit all the formatting information into the XML. So what we literally do is to apostrophe, we really commit the XML like this. So in the US, when they print the standards, they extract all this formatting and they add their own formatting. What you're seeing, what you're looking at here, this is a number we could tag it as a number. A number is agnostic. Once the number, is tagged as such, every single publisher in the world can process that number the way they want. And it's fine for them to process that number the way they want. We add a space, you can add a comma or an elephant between the 1,000, and the 100. And if you look even further, this is a value with the meters there. So sorry, I don't know why I did that. So that accessibility mouse is nice, but it's also a bit annoying. That's a value. We could drive the list of, weight and measures which are available in standards so that you don't have to guess them anymore about the kind of units which are available in your standards. You could have your own list of units that you refer to all the time. And once we tag these things properly, they will also be consistent across our catalog. So if you want to extract the list of values out of a standard, a robot, a computer, will be able to process that information for the consumers. If Volvo tomorrow needs to know what are the different values that were impacted by the revision of the standard, we'll have ways for them to know, just with a script, those 3 values were changed in the revision of this standard. And those 3 values refer to resistance or speed or, instead of having to read the entire standard or to make a basic texture track and change. So this is where basically, there will be an impact for you, potentially. Because technically today you can just type a lot of things when you draft standard. A lot of it is purely textual. But tomorrow, if the OSD becomes more prescriptive, then instead of just typing a number or typing a value, you might have to input here, a value. You might have to pick a list of measurements, which is an official list of measurements. And you may have to type, the decimals, the number of decimals. And here we don't want to make your work harder, but we want to make deliverable better. So I don't know if you want to react on this one, because this is one we want to keep close connection with you. But there's a lot of value for SIS as a publisher, but also all the other publishers in our ecosystem. So I don't know, Lisa, also if you want to intervene on this one. That's a quite an interesting one.
Yeah, just to say that obviously we are on a learning curve, and what we can use it with this tool also on the publishing side. So we are keen to get input from especially sort of outside of our walls. so from you as standard users and so on how we could use it on the publishing side. But yeah, obviously a little bit of an extra effort for those of you developing. So, but bear in mind the goal. it's for the reader of the standard, or the user of the standard rather.
And Patrice, you are not allowed to have the full stop. You have to have the decimal comma instead.
Sorry, I forgot the actual rules. Thanks.
I stole Sven's comment. I'm sorry, Sven.
Thanks. And the truth is that the implementation of these things is pretty straightforward. So I know ANSI has been requesting a change on this, for better management of the decimal marker, because they don't use the comma, I think, for more than a decade. Went to ANSI, they've been requesting this for a very long time. So here we could implement quite a big change, which is quite easy, but potentially, there's an impact on the way you author the contents. So I'm going to resume the presentation again. So there's another person in this room who came to me just before, and we mentioned the fact that today we necessarily don't handle terminology all the same way. So let me just share my screen. Where's the presentation now? Sorry about that. I can't find the presentation anymore. Are people online seeing the presentation?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So at the moment, we've implemented the management of terminology entries. You can have 2 levels of folders, and you can have 2 levels of term, a term and a subterm. And the thing is, we don't necessarily all handle terminology the same way, also with the regional organizations. So there's a need for us to have a better coordination with the regional organizations like the SEN and SENELEC, and also with the members to define common policies regarding how we handle, the management of certain elements, so that it's consistent once again across all the actors of the standardization. So here there will be a need for better governance, and once we agree on a way to manage elements across the entire catalog, there will be implementation of changes in tools like the OSD that will follow these guidelines. But then when you manage terms, whether it's at international level, regional level, or national level, it will be the same across basically all the deliverables. So all this governance about the upstream, the process of how the work is done in the standard, and the midstream, how we enrich those contents, we realize that we need to have a better governance, and we will basically set reference group that will discuss these matters. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that we'll be exploring is to try to simplify your life and to try to use technology to be more efficient in the process of standardization. I'll give you one example, which is the parallel editing process. So for you committee managers, today it's quite a difficult process, because the document you submit at stage 40 is the one which is going to be balloted out there for members. And that document is then edited by an editor, an editorial manager at ISOCS. So the members are commenting on a document, which is already the previous version of the standard. And when you get the editorial version updated, you get that collection of comments that were made on that previous version that was balloted. And in a tool like OSD, that will lead to a lot of comments losing their context, because potentially the underlying text has been completely changed by the editor. That's a possibility. So in a previous word-based ecosystem, that made a lot of sense, because anyway, you're going to work on different documents. But where you work in a single source of truth, we ought to rethink some of our processes to make them more sequential, and to, allow you to have the submission of a document, an editorial review, and then a commenting ballot where the comments are made on an editorial reviewed document, so that there's less comments for you to process also afterwards. So, like I told you before, right now we have modelized standardization as it exists, and we will start exploring ways to make you save time and be more efficient in standardization. Another thing we are going to develop actually by the end of the year, so it will be ready very soon, and we're pretty proud about it. Today, when we watch committees work as pilots for us, there's something I've always noticed. The participation is just not equal among experts, and there's quite a lot of experts who speak poorly English. I'd like to know if you observe that in your respective committees today. Would you have a need to make the participation of non-English speakers better? Is that something you observe today? Yes, no? Yes? Okay, so what we are going to do before the end of the year is to implement a translation tool in the OSD. So we are going to work on 3 fronts. The first one is to have a translation of the UI, the interface, so that if you're from Italy, the menus appear in Italian. If you're from Japan, the menus appear in Japanese. So if you're an author, you're not drafting Japanese, you're drafting English because you're supposed to provide English contents, but all the features are translated into your own language. So the tool itself is, a bit more familiar for you. The second thing we're going to work on is to let you make a selection in the text and translate it into your own language. Again, for understanding what the text means. And the third thing we'll be working on is to give the possibilities to experts to provide a comment in their native language and translate it into English before submitting it for the committee managers. So we are really looking at, we are still providing English things, but there's a way to facilitate the work of international experts. And that's a real use case, in other parts of the world. So I'd like to take your feedback on this one. If anybody has a reaction, for it, against it, dangers.
I think it sounds like a very good idea because many times if we have very good experts from say, very typical Japan, their English might be not so good. But I would say the biggest problem is actually during meetings. Because at home, these experts, they have some student or assistant which is fluent in English, perhaps, which will help them. But it's actually more in the verbal stage, I would say. I have seen that problem. I haven't seen the problem so much in the written parts. I'm not sure if OSD can help there.
I see a danger in setting a precedent that they're working in their own language, especially if you're trying to be more collaborative. They are not aware of their own settings. It's being set to their own language. It doesn't work to share, for example, sharing their screen and such, communicating. And also just if it's translated using AI, that since terminology tends to be very important in the document, then the translation has to take the context into account extremely well for it to be a valid translation.
Can you still see my screen online as well? Okay, so let me share my screen.
No, not now.
Okay. So we completely get these points, and we are really trying, to also bring a help. We are going to put a lot of provisos into place to ensure that first, the contents stay in our house. We're not going to use any random translation, AI, arbitrary going on the cloud. The libraries we are going to use for translation are going to be in our home, controlled in our servers. And we are really trying to provide the help to facilitate somewhat, that's an additional value of the OSD. So I just wanted to demo you're almost the first ones to see this. It's very new. What we mean here. So basically, I'm making a selection here. The UI will be reviewed, definitely. And I'm translating this selection from English into, Swedish. Now I'm afraid. So I don't read Swedish. That's just the first trial. The UI will be reviewed. Now we are going to make it much more user-friendly. But I will copy-paste this. And basically here you have the Swedish translation. I'm going to copy-paste into Word. I should not do that. Huh? Marta is going to. Why is it not working? Where is my screen now? There. I'm not able to copy it. I'm going to copy it into Fonto OSD. It's much better. Just give us a second. All right, so here we are. You can tell me how bad the translation is now. But basically, you know, we're going to work on the libraries. We're going to try to improve what they produce based on the feedback we get. And again, the intent, when you look at the proof of concept, is not to have users draft something in something else in English. They won't be able to. But it gives them a little bit of help, you know, to understand what the content means. And you were talking about meetings. So what we are going to do also, okay, I don't want to annotate anything. I don't know why it's doing that. So when I make a comment, so I'm going to make a selection on this word. I can actually that's not the one I wanted to do. Oh, they probably have removed it. Yeah. Yeah, they removed it for now. But basically, it would be possible for you to draft the comment in your own native language. So you type in Swedish. There's a translation feature that will show you the result in English. And then you can submit that as a comment in English. And also, we will translate, you know, all the support button features and all that. So during a meeting, a person connecting, at least they can say, I support this, or, you know, I'm replying to this in my own language, submit in English, could be a help. And once this is delivered, tell us, yeah, it's making participation better, or it's actually creating more problems. But you're the ones asking also for more participation. So obviously more participation might mean more challenges, but also it's, you know, something that our governance is requesting. So let me do that exercise of launching the presentation again. Sharing my screen. Okay. And now let's go more into the OSD national that we've been discussing. So the aim is really to tackle national standards and national adoptions, not any form of other deliverables. So if there are unstructured documents, you know, that don't follow what a standard is, we are not covering them at the moment. But we want to come to a common rational modification, modelization of what a national standard is and how it can derive from a national standard in the case of a national adoption. And setting these processes also really leverages a lot of value to facilitate potentially translation. Because if SIS wants to implement translation mechanisms to translate international standards, they will always be reliable. They'll be consistent. Codification will always be the same. So that for SIS as a publisher leverages a lot of value. Facilitating adoptions, of course, because we'll have just a system that handles them, you know, and from end to end. But also, if you look beyond this, if there is a use case, you know, where there is an international standard and there are 5 or 6 national adoptions, which potentially have slight adaptations for the local markets, for consumers that would need to go across these national adoptions will also be consistent. So that potentially leverages a lot of value for these consumers. Last but not least, and we are going to dive into SMART soon, that will be a huge facilitator for the adoption of smart contents nationally, because it all ties together, and that's why we're going to go into SMART very soon. So has any of you seen that chart before? So that basically described what we believe SMART is today from an end-to-end perspective. So anybody discovering the term SMART today, or are you kind of familiar with SMART? You have all heard about SMART before? Okay. So we really see SMART, you know, as different streams of work potentially across our catalog with different sources and different end values, different products. Definitely, we envisage OSD to be a pillar for the creation of smart contents. And why is that? Because you are creating standard contents. So you're going to get new features in the future to create smart contents. And that's what we call verified smart content. It means that it's a smart content that comes from the onset. It's part of the standard. So there's no back processing. You're creating the smart content, and there's a consensus building on these smart contents right from the start. So today it could be as simple as, you know, identifying a requirement, but formally identifying a requirement, adding a requirement type, or linking two requirements together. Then we have what we call the unverified smart content. The unverified smart content is what we process from the back catalog. So you have an existing standard that has been published 3 years ago. We are not expecting you at this stage to revise the standard to be able to make it smart. So ISO and IC have developed what we call smartification pipelines that take your contents and add smart unverified contents on top of it. So how do we do it? It's very simple. We spot a shall somewhere and we extract this as a requirement, for instance. That's a basic example. And all those data will be basically provided to consumers, members, obviously, and the consumers through members via smart services. And here in the smart services, you can envisage a variety of things. You know, so the data provided as a rough data to SIS, for SIS to build products on, ISO intervening for members who have no digital facilities as a provider for these facilities. But what's really important to realize in all this is that all that system is based, you know, on data models that we need basically to kind of agree on. Otherwise, it's difficult to build something which is scalable downstream. So that vision of having OSD features to create smart contents is quite essential, because this is the only way we can ensure, you know, that the underlying XML is consistent and that the smart contents are also created in a very consistent manner. So ISO and IC are going to work by the end of the year on providing clarity and a vision regarding what we plan to implement. And we expect an OSD Smart extension to be ready by the beginning of 2025. So what that extension will do is actually letting committees add smart contents on top of existing contents. So it's very similar than the commenting features that you've seen today. You'll be able to select portions of the text, and you'll be able to add metadata on top of that text to identify provisions, provision supplements, so to properly, you know, mark those areas of text as requirements. And then that data will be provided alongside the standard to members so that they can process it basically and use it in their systems. There's been quite a lot of debate whether we should be prescriptive in the OSD in the way we write requirements, or if we should use what we call an extension model, a tagging model, a metadata model, to add smart contents on top of existing contents. So what we mean here, I'm going to show you a little example because I think it's a compelling one. So when you look into the OSD, that would manifest in two ways. Let me share again. Yeah, oh no, it's really annoying. So if tomorrow we become prescriptive about how requirements should be typed, that would mean that instead of, let me just take this. Instead of typing something like the organization shall, and then that's a very common one, do this, do that, not do that, maybe do this, and do this only if 2 is true, and so on. And today we have such variety across our catalog regarding how requirements, provisions, permissions are created, which creates an immense mess to smartify it. If we were prescriptive, it means that we would change the underlying XML to create new codification to support the insertion of requirements. So instead of typing requirements, you would have the similar thing as adding a note. You would have add a requirement, and the way you type that requirement might be extremely prescriptive as well. You know, subject, action, benefit, condition, and a link between those things. The metadata model is different. You make a selection, and the way you comment in Fonto, OSD, you add additional data on top of the underlying text. That has two benefits. The first direct benefit, the underlying text doesn't change. So when you look at a PDF, it looks the same. You're adding data on top of text that you're marking and selecting. When you look at the prescriptive model, it looks very different. Typing things like this will no longer be possible. You'll have to identify a relationship between those list items. So to produce a PDF which is easy to read for an end user might be very challenging. But this is more prescriptive. So in a way, it's more precise. The challenge we have is, at the moment, we have such diverse back catalog that we have no clear idea how prescriptive we should become to codify requirements. So we want, in a first iteration, to add this metadata model to let committees add that data that would be useful for consumers, and eventually refine as time goes. If we find common patterns that are used consistently across our catalog, define that prescriptivity once and for all, and then add it in the tool. But at this stage, we believe it is too early, and there's too many different use cases to come with one way to tag requirements across the entire catalog. So when you see these features coming up and you wonder why we did it this way, I wanted you to have some form of background. And I'm happy to see if there are any questions about this.
Just to clarify, the thought is now that it is up to the technical committee or maybe the working group, or if an individual has this responsibility to do the task of tagging, creating this metadata. Because if the requirements, the provisions are written in a way that you could go this way or you could go that way based on like different branching trees, then they have to, in the tag, say it's exactly this way that should be interpreted by a computer.
So about the process, it is not clear as yet who is supposed to do that and when. And we are going to refine this moving forward. At the moment, we are working on producing a feature that would allow someone to do that job. And then my guess is we will be providing this as a pilot feature. We know that certain members want to leverage this, like, for their national use as well. And at least it creates a consistent way to do it across our entire catalog. The approach we follow, like I said, doesn't change the underlying text, but the feature we're going to provide here will be very restrictive. So that's what will follow basically certain models which are being established jointly with the ISO, IC, and the members. So the list of requirement types, it will not be a free-for-all. It will be a selection you can choose from. And the type of data you'll be able to add here will also be restricted. So that's where we're going with this first iteration.
Thank you. So you're limiting it. And then you also indirectly answered, I think, my other question, which was if this pilot will be included in the national OSD.
So we are building the feature so that it's included, and then it will be up to the members to provide it for the national use or not. And we are trying to keep a great coordination here between the ISO, the IC, and the SEN and SENELEC as well, because it's fundamental we follow a similar approach. Because if we start having different approaches, different codification to codify the same information, we repeat the mistakes from the past, and processing these information downstream will not be as good for members and extremely expensive. So this is where we want to, we are not leading this. We are coordinating this for the benefit of all of you. Basically, that's the message we want to have here. So we need everybody around the table, and we're not going to make the decisions, but we need to have experts, leaders, consumers, and members to be able to agree on the modality that's the best moving forward. And OSD is, you see, now I hope it makes sense. Those are quite tough topics, but OSD is the central point. It's the interface to all our stakeholders. It's the only central place where we can connect to everyone. So it makes sense that we start seeing this, you know, as a foundation for us to build our catalog. Sorry?
Your battery.
Oh. Thanks. I need coffee too. So we'll be there soon. There's a lot of other things in the last slide we are exploring that could facilitate your work. So ISO and IC are looking into providing help and assistance. I hate using the term AI because AI, you know, is used for everything today, but very basic things, helping to summarize information. So the OSD has an access to all your other standards. So when you write a scope, we could look at all the scopes of all your, and we could provide you help to write the scope of your current project. Summarizing, rationalizing information. So there are linguistic tools we could integrate in the OSD to improve, you know, the way the information is drafted. Terminology lookups, we've discussed about them. Referencing, those are also things that we will implement inside the OSD. So there's a big amount of features we are exploring that we could be implementing in the OSD to facilitate your drafting. But if you have common use cases that you want to share with us, onboard the OSD and let us know, and we can do a proof of concept, you know, for you. So that's also why now is a great time still to join the OSD, because you could be building, you know, specific features based on your needs. And with this, I think we can go for coffee.
So should we, there is supposed to be fika outside, 15 minutes. Is that okay? Okay, so reconvene at about 3:20.